Hello and welcome. My name is Kesiki Samuel and I have developed this automated HTMT calculator to assist partial least square structural equation modeling researchers in the calculation of discriminant validity. The application comes handy with a sidebar that provides a link to about 10 dedicated worksheets. The calculator is designed to ease the calculation of discriminant validity in two simple steps. First, under the setup sheet, the researcher defines the structure of their respective models. Specify the number of factors. A researcher can specify between 2 and 10 factors. And then move on to specify the number of items contained by each factor. When that is done, the researcher moves to the matrix sheet where they drop their correlations. Consider a model with 3 factors, and each of these factors can carry about 7 items. When that is done, the researcher copies their between and within factor correlations from their result output, maybe in SPSS or any other application, and then moves to the matrix sheet. Into the yellow cell, you paste all the correlations into this matrix, and then move on straight to the result summary to get the results, and then follow that up with interpretation and diagnostics about their particular model. First, let me give you a brief review of what the calculator is all about. There is the menu sheet, which provides information on the application's name and copyright information. The introductory sheets provides directives on how to use the application. Dissemination channels for the application and how to cite the application in case it has been used in your project. There is a setup sheet that I've already explained briefly how it works. The researcher specifies the structure of their model by first of all defining the number of factors contained in their models, and then move on to define the number of items contained in by each of their factors. Then there is a matrix sheet where within and between factor correlations are dropped. There is the HTMT sheet, which provides indexing information for your matrix. There is the HTMT output sheet, which provides item mapping information and within factor correlations between 3 different variants of the calculator. It also provides information for between factor means, and then the last set of tables gives you information on the HTMT ratios for 3 different variants. This application has been defined to calculate HTMT not just for one particular variant, but for 3 different variants. First, there's the standard HTMT ratio, which is analogous to the Henseler standard. Then there is the maximum HTMT ratio, which is analogous to the Henseler HTMT2 for positive correlations, but in this application it's been extended to take even negative correlations. And then there is a modified HTMT ratio, which I've introduced myself. Now, the advantage in using this application is that the researcher doesn't just get results from a particular HTMT ratio, but the conclusion is arrived at due to the combination of 3 different variants of HTMT. Next sheet is the result summary tab, which gives a summary of the HTMT ratios for the 3 different variants and the average HTMT value, which is the average of the 3 different variants. And then there is a criterion status for the different variants to indicate whether discriminant validity has been established or not. The first line of cells becomes green when your HTMT value is below 0.85, meaning that if all your HTMT variants are below 0.85, then the first line of cells will be highlighted green. If not, they will all turn red. Some can turn red, some can be green, depending on whether the threshold has been met or not. Then there is a next line, which is the liberal criterion. That means any value between 0.85 and 0.9, then the second line of cells is highlighted. When discriminant validity is violated, that means that your discriminant validity is above 0.9, then the last line of cells is highlighted green. Then there is the interpretation and diagnostic sheets, which gives you information about your model. And there is a verdict, a judgment space where the application gives you a verdict as to whether discriminant validity has been established, whether it's borderline or whether it's been violated. And there is a diagnostic space also, which gives you, the researcher, advice on what to do to their respective factors and their factors indicators. Then there is the adjustable threshold space, where the researcher can adjust the thresholds or the thresholds for their respective models. The researcher can choose to be very lenient. For example, you can choose a threshold of about 0.95, or you can choose a cutoff of about 0.8. Then there is a space here where the researcher can also adjust the gap that between the three different variants. That means the researcher can choose high or low sensitivity between the modified and the standard version, or the researcher can also choose the gap between the maximum and the standard version, because each of these three different variants have different things that they tell you about your model. For example, the modified version gives you the upper bound, the standard version is the baseline, and the maximum version is the consistency check. So there is now the second to the last sheet, which is the information sheet, which gives you information about HTMT thresholds and what you need to know in order to interpret the results. And then there's the references sheet. Now let me come back to the setup sheet. Recently, I was carrying out a study on looking at students' attitude towards mathematics, and my model had 3 factors, and each of those factors could carry about 7 items. So the matrix automatically crops according to the definitions that I've entered, and then I can go on to paste, copy and paste within and between factor correlations for these 3 factors into the yellow cell, and then move straight to get the results. In this case, the results for the modified, the standard, and the HTMT, maximum HTMT ratios are all below the cutoff value of 0.86. Even the average value for the 3 different variants is 0.67, which is also well below the cutoff. Now you realize that under the criterion status, the first line or the first row of cells are all highlighted green to show that the 3 different variants are all well below the cutoff of 0.85. This means that discriminant validity has been achieved across all 3 different variants. Under the interpretation and diagnostic sheets, I can adjust the threshold ratio. In this case, I can choose it, I can put it at 0.85, and you see that the verdict here still tells me that discriminant validity has been established. There is some information here about diagnostics, which helps the researcher in case they're having difficulties with their models. So I can also go on to adjust the gap between the modified and the standard versions. I can choose high and low sensitivity depending on the strictness level of your model, or if you're carrying out research for exploratory purposes, you can choose large gaps or large sensitivities, and so on and so forth. So in this case, the gap between the modified and the standard versions is allowed at 0.1, and for the gap between the standard and the maximum version, I leave that at 0.05. So you see, discriminant validity has been established. The application is quite easy to use, and when you are done, you can come to the HTMT sheet and clear the matrix page. So you see the matrix sheet has been cleared. After that, move to the setup sheet and clear the setup, and your application is back to its normal state. So this application is quite easy to use. In case the researcher wants to understand how this application functions, there is a research paper that is linked to this application that every user can download and use to see how the application was arrived at. Thank you so much for your attention.